Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for coming back again. This is the 11th time I've been up on stage on a Pocket Gamer London event. It's hard to imagine that it's been going that long, but it has. And what's even more hard to imagine is that we still manage to get amazing people to talk about amazing things to do with games. But we do, and we're going to have a lot of that here today. So in particular, what I am going to try to do for you is obviously welcome you to Pocket Gamer Connect's afternoon in track one. I have to remind us of our very important people, the people without whom we can't do this, namely our sponsors. We have our diamond sponsor of Almeida. We have our titanium sponsors of TikTok and Epic. We have our platinum sponsor of AppChange, Xsolla, and CashKit. Our gold sponsors, well, I've talked enough. There's gold sponsors on here, so amazing people. Genuinely, this stuff only happens because we can do that. So, remember, if you're wanting to give back to the games industry, remember Pocket Gamer is a great place to do that. But we're going to talk about powering payments in this session. And we are delighted that we have Xsolla who are sponsoring that. And I think we have a little bit of a clip from our sponsors. So if I can ask that to be played. Great stuff. So we're going to kick off now. But just before I do that, remember that please use whatever social media of choice you have. I have switched to Blue Sky myself. However, there are others apparently. #PG Connect, I would recommend you use if you use that to make sure that people know what you're saying. Obviously, the other side of it is don't forget, you can ask questions. I will make sure that you can ask questions. I will be around, and don't worry, if you're shy, I will probably find a way to ask these guys questions. But thankfully, I don't have to do that for most of the time. We're very lucky that we have a great set of hosts. Anyway, we have with us Chris Meredith from Xsolla. We've got Nick Poole from Ukie. We've got Stuart Dinsey from Curve Games. We've got Charlotte Cook from Team 17. And they're going to tell us about playing by the new rules, game development under the new Digital Markets Act. Guys, over to you.
Just looking to you for the answers, is you.
Okay, we all comfy? All right. Well, hi everybody. Thanks for making the time to join us today. Well, that's all right. I'm really pleased to be here with such an esteemed panel, chairing this fireside chat today, which I think is about a really important subject that everybody's got an opinion on. It's a little bit in the future, but at the same point in time, I want the discussion today to talk about how we move from where we are today towards that point in time. So joining me today, I've got Charlotte Cook, who's the commercial director at Team 17, been delivering commercial success at Team 17 for over 2 years now, ambassador of Women in Games, and a board member of the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital Gaming Advisory Panel. Next to her, we have the esteemed Nick Poole, OBE, who's got a very impressive career with Government Media Task Force, European Commission Culture and Technology, and now is leading the charge of the, I like to say, revitalised Ukie. So thanks for joining us today, Nick. And then finally, and by no means last, we have Mr. Stuart Dinsey, a true goat of the gaming industry, who having launched both MCV and also CTW, with his company Intent Media, and was also responsible for rolling out Develop back in the day. I won't talk to the date with that because it'll age him, and I don't think he'll want to do that. He's now leading the charge with Curve, doing a great job there as chairman and CEO. And in his spare time, I hear he's an avid fan of Stevenage football. So today we're going to discuss the new challenges and opportunities for developers in the face of the European Marketing Act. And we'll talk more beyond that as well, particularly as that comes into force on a timeline that is yet to be really defined. Last year really posed a significant challenge for the video games industry, but nevertheless, mobile gaming still remains a beacon of accessibility and innovation. Xsolla did their own state of play report this year, and the numbers are increasing massively. We're looking to have a market by 27 that is close to 120 billion. And from last year's projections, that was now down around 98. So we are increasing massively towards that. So with millions of players worldwide and the market continues to grow massively, what's the future mobile games what's the promise behind that? What are we going to do in regards to making sure that we can all be part of that and also realize those opportunities? So in consideration of those questions, and also the DMA, our session today will really focus on two critical parts: monetization challenges and opportunities, and then opportunities for growth and also for innovation. So I've got questions around that. We'll expand that with the knowledge and the experience the guys got here, and then we'll take that further afield. Hopefully at the end of this conversation or the end of the channel, we'll be able to have a Q&A where we can open up to the floor as well. So as you all know, the DMA is set to reshape how digital platforms fundamentally operate. When, where, none of us know right now, but it will have an impact on the gaming industry. That cannot be overstated. Monetization strategies in mobile gaming are the transforming light of the DMA. Again, I want to dig into that a little bit more in regards to having a very split DMA. We've got a UK-centric one, European-centric one. We've got to figure out what that actually means. But it's clear that the mobile industry, the mobile gaming industry, is very much a center point of what the future aspirations for the DMA looks to achieve. So in light of alternative payment solutions and to reduce a reliance on platform commissions significantly, how are developers and developers going to generate revenue going forward into this new world? And in light of the DMA, the questions I will really want to get into, and this is what I'm going to ask this panel with, how might introducing alternative app stores and payment options impact in-play purchase models and revenue streams? That's the first part. And also, what do they think the competition in mobile ecosystems will lead to? New consumer-friendly pricing models? What innovations do you think that will actually open up to? So having put those out there, let's start with ladies first. Charlotte, what are your views around DMA aligned to those questions? What are your thoughts?
I think obviously it's always a positive when you're looking at sort of revenue streams and there's possibilities for new ones to open up. I think, where I work, we're not very mobile heavy focus, we're more PC console, and I think what this definitely opens up is an opportunity to look at alignment of distribution models, revenue streams that we are used to dealing with in that area of the business, and sort of being able to replicate them and maybe bring more IP or more games actually over to the mobile platform, because there's now an opportunity to kind of look at having similar business models.
Yeah.
I think split strategy is always hard and probably challenging for smaller businesses. So I think the way the DMA rolls out, obviously with the UK, the EU,
Sure.
and how then you would have to apply it globally, could present challenges. But I think fundamentally it's opening up a door that is untapped at the minute, and it's going to allow for sort of experimentation, which will benefit not only publishers, developers, but consumers, because there'll be more competitive pricing models and product lifecycle management opportunities that currently maybe don't exist within the mobile space.
No, that makes sense. I think that leads on with you, Stu, really, in terms of curve, their balance between the different platforms. Do you see this change that DMA is going to bring about as opening up opportunities that you can now have to be more mobile savvy or have to be more involved?
I think it's more an evolution generally across all the platforms, across all the sectors where developers particularly and publishers are looking for the opportunity to keep more of their money and the opportunity to have more channels to reach consumers. If we look at where we were as Curve started life as a developer. We were a developer, we were a work-for-hire developer, and we found it increasingly difficult to get the work from publishers. So we started publishing our own games, and then we started publishing third-party games. At that point, we had first mover advantage because we started using the digital retail stores when the bigger companies weren't, because they were having to look after the relationships with the high street retail and discounting and pricing, and we had this immediate ability to promote for discounting. So at that point, Curve and Team 17 actually, and Devolver we all had first mover advantage.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't anymore because high street retail has effectively disappeared, and everybody is on Steam. So remember there were companies that refused to go on Steam, like Ubisoft and Sony and Microsoft. So everybody is on Steam, and also people are comfortable downloading games on console. I think where we are now is the beginning of what will become the norm, but you can't quite see it. So one of my favourite expressions is, it takes years to be an overnight success. So right now, it doesn't feel like it's going to change the market, but the options are there. And also with companies like Xsolla and their competitors, the helping hand is there for developers to find a new way of getting to market, retaining more revenue, and having first mover advantage. I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and so with those better choices to make easier options about making money and make more value from what you've got, I guess that transition into more choice has got to be a good thing, right? Somewhere down the line. Always. Sorry, Nick, what's your thoughts on this from an independent?
Yeah, I think a more diverse and level playing field for developers is a good thing per se. So I think it's important not to think we have to wait for the legislation or regulation to come along. And there are significant points of divergence between the European DMA and how that's being interpreted into the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act here in the UK. So it is going to take some time before we understand what those regulatory differences look like and how we lean into them. But that said, a more plural ecosystem for developers to find a player and to find ways of making money, we can get busy doing that anyway. Yeah. And so I think the important is to build that new knowledge, build that capability, be adventurous, be open to new models. And then when that enabling legislation comes along, say, okay, how does that change in the ecosystem enable us to do those things we're already heading towards? Right. I think for me, though, there is this point about in Europe, gatekeepers, in the UK, companies with strategic market significance, also fulfill a useful role in the ecosystem. And so I think one of the things we can be doing is thinking, okay, well, consumers trust them. There is a solution to discovery within those gatekeepers. So how do we get busy building those bits of the infrastructure now so that when we shake things up, or if the legislation shakes things up, we have solutions to those problems? Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point, because we can't just wait for the DMA to come in and have an effect and the learning curve that's going to bring to bear, because it could be one week, 1 month, 1 year, and it's probably more to the latter. So in the meantime, life goes on. And in the meantime, there is more payment solution choices in the market. The market's getting more congested. The market's still increasing. So it's incumbent on the players, therefore, to be more aggressive, to be like, what is the solution I'm going to work to today? Knowing this is coming down the line. So what are you doing at Curves to, and knowing that between the point of where the DMA hits and where you are today, how's that gap working for you guys?
Well, we're the publisher, so what we do starts with what the developer wants to do, and they can be of all different shapes and sizes and desires. So our biggest game, for example, Human Fall Flat, the developer of that game simply does not believe in monetization in-game. So we've sold over 50 million units of this game, including 5 million on mobile, and he will flatly refuses any attempt, particularly in China, to monetize in-game content. So whatever.
Is that because he's made so much money anyway?
No, he doesn't believe in it. He's fundamentally against it. Okay, so everything we've done has been free updates, and you know what? It's worked, hasn't it? Because we've sold over 50 million units. Yeah. So I think it depends on the developer, and we will listen to them. I think the difference for us as a business now, and probably the same with others, they're all bigger than us, but similar to us, is that we're probably looking at smaller budget games. We're probably looking at how we take games onto these other platforms, and then those mechanics, transactions, small transactions suddenly become really important. Yeah. So if consumers are restricted in how many credit cards can be used or whatever, that's not going to help the growth of that. So we're interested in the skills of the developer and what the developer wants, right, rather than us having some big curve. This is the way we do it.
Yeah, I guess that brings up an interesting point, really, between the needs to make sure your ROI is going to be achieved with any kind of the development that you're looking to do or partnership with a developer, but at the same point in time, marrying their wants and their expectations between what the go-to-market strategy should be. So it's going to bring a closer reliance on the knowledge of the market into play with you guys, one I thought, to be able to get that balance correct. And is that the same transition that Team 17, you think, will be facing, Charlotte?
Yeah, similar. I mean, we have the same. We have to, we're largely third-party publishing, so we work with the developers to consider their wants and needs. I think, as we all have said, it's still quite a nascent topic, so it's kind of how do we start exploring this? I think something that I think could be very interesting is sort of the cross-play, cross-progression opportunities that this could unearth. We have an IP called Hell Let Loose. It's Team 17 first-party IP, so that's one we own. And potentially if we were trying to look at entering markets where maybe there's a lower barrier to entry in terms of price,
right,
a mobile strategy could be beneficial there. So I think it definitely opens up possibilities and new thinking and maybe new challenges. And I think also we can look at some of our successful IP and think, would this now work in mobile in a way that maybe a few years ago we would never have considered doing. So
sure.
It's exciting, I think, to have those options, but it's still very early days, and it needs to be right for the player as well. You don't want to just create sort of monetization for the sake of monetization.
No, not at all. But a lot of people I'm speaking to are seeing an acceleration in the marketplace where, be it considerations towards AI or getting a quicker route to market or getting a quicker return on what the investment's been. So time is going to get more squeezed, one would think, in regards to what's going to be going on over this period of time. And so from a Ukie point of view, Nick, how are you positioning the capabilities to support this infrastructure with the speed of change, new opportunities, way more consideration towards the sum of the parts to get to one thing? It's a lot, right?
It is, and I think there's two levels to that. There's a strategic policy level intervention that says, let's understand what the regulations are saying, what they're allowing, what they're disallowing. I think there is a real risk that you break up a duopoly and you create a new generation of lots of walled gardens. So if we want that vision of cross-play, cross-progression, how are we actually going to power that kind of interoperability between these platforms? I think it's going to be absolutely key. So there's those big set pieces. But there's also just helping businesses to understand, as Stuart says, you're going to be able to have the freedom to carve out the right business model for the right game for the player. That creates enormous opportunities to make games more accessible and affordable, which is brilliant. It also has the risk of potentially confusing the hell out of the consumer.
Yep.
And so we need to find ways of educating ourselves as an industry about how do we help the players navigate what could become a really quite plural environment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it always amazes me when I talk to developers that understanding the intensely creative, that great innovation in terms of the development side, but that journey through monetization, that journey into what go to market, is almost a secondary consideration to you're just going to focus on the game. And now, and it'd be interesting to get your perspective, you can't do one. You'll have to do all three. And it's back to what Stu was saying. It's about that consideration of what the needs are of the developer. But at the same time, you've got to take them on the journey. And they've got to be relevant to, well, this is what a monetization model for us in this context with this game looks like. So is that something that Curve already doing, Stu, or is that a new...
In this particular space, we've started working with Xsolla.
Yeah.
So we're starting to understand how a web store works, but we see it as a work in progress. But with regards to developers, and you're absolutely right, the developer will often be thinking solely about the game. A publisher only adds value when a publisher is doing the things that the developer doesn't want to do.
Right.
Okay? So, or adding something that a developer can't do. So there is lots of reasons why a developer should self-publish, and those reasons increase. And every time something like this emerges, if a developer wants to look into it and do it themselves, they could be very, very successful. But similarly, a publisher has to then raise its game.
Yeah.
And if we can learn those skills so that we have a template or a system that works for, we know how this works in the same way as we know how BD and gaining revenue from your content all over the world with lots of different partners works, rather than you having to hire somebody to do it, and that goes right back to the early days of indie, which was when publishers emerged. It was things like, we'll handle submissions for you,
Right.
you know, and we'll handle classification for you. There's off-the-shelf solutions for a lot of those now, and there's independent agencies that you can use. So you can put those pieces together.
Right.
So I think for a publisher to learn how to say, we've got this,
Yep.
is really important, but it's a work in progress. We don't currently have those skills, which is why I go back to the tools and the initiatives that your company's doing, and I'm sure your competitors are doing as well.
Maybe.
And if they're not, they're daft. I think that's the point we're at, because we are trying to learn, but there's no reason why a studio shouldn't learn it at the same time as a publisher, so that that studio can feel that they have the power when it comes to deciding how they go to market.
I couldn't agree more in that respect, Stu. I think that learning that is continuous, and that learning of speed of execution, which is now very relevant, is something that it's not a maybe, it's a has to be. It's just, how do you do it? And it's not only bespoke in each company, but it's also going to be bespoke with every relationship that company has with the developer. I guess that's the same for Team 17 as well, Charlotte, right?
Yeah, I think, the market's tough. You need to have as many tools in your arsenal as possible to know how you can bring games to market in different ways. So
Sure.
It's imperative, if you want to be competitive and your games succeed in the best way possible, that you know all the options available for those games. But I know at Team 17, especially on the commercial side, we have a very consultative approach with our developers. So we will talk them through, we'll recommend best practice. Sometimes they come to the table with suggestions that might be new to us, and then you kind of collaborate on them. But I think it's always about sort of having a full suite of, like, a menu of options. And obviously partnering with, service providers such as yourself helps us be more nimble, agile, and kind of we can make things happen quicker, which is also essential in this market.
It's all good, right?
Yeah.
I think from an interesting point then from your point of view, Nick, so that's showing that there are going to be more parts that you have to interact with to get to the one solution. We're bringing on new partners to work with our existing solutions. We've just taken a relationship with Appfire to sort of just broaden, and back to what Stu said, broaden the ability to deliver, because it's all about delivery. So from a Ukie point of view, that's, I guess, you've got to put your arms around a much bigger area and have a much bigger suite of suppliers that are going to be making the difference towards that single centre point.
And it's super exciting, right? This is a much broader ecosystem than it was even going back to 10, 15 years ago. And I think those old boundaries between publisher, developer, who sits where in the ecosystem, co-dev, work for hire, those are blurring increasingly. More people are working in different modes, increasingly supported by a range of, off-the-shelf turnkey solutions, kind of things that people can pick up. I think, ostensibly, we've heard a lot today about how, when there is growth, it's going to be centered on a very small number of games. So actually players, more playtime, fewer games, and don't disrespect to those games. I mean, that's fantastic. But we want to really see a really successful ecosystem for the longer players. We want there to be points of access. And in order to make that success pathway accessible, you've got to reduce the cost of production. You've got to reduce the cost of go-to-market, which means picking solutions that work, that scale, that you can kind of work with. But it's that creative vision from the developer. One of the things we hope is that if you do have a more disrupted ecosystem, more of the money goes into development, more creative freedom, more risks, more great games. And so we need that kind of virtuous cycle to keep going.
Yeah, it's continuous, right?
Yeah.
So that sort of brings us on nicely to the next area of discussion, and that's for opportunities for growth and innovation. And my big hope for the DMA is it does foster openness and a transparency and a levelling of the playing field, to your point before, Nick. And hopefully the DMA will empower the smaller studios, encourage them with alternative distribution models, and also spur cross-platform innovation as well. But I really want to know from the panelists what you think about the future of the industry, considering this openness. Do you think it will foster greater cross-market platform? And do you think it would enable more seamless game experiences? Do you think that will, whenever it happens, will be a consequence? Let's start with you, Stu.
I imagine it will, but it all starts with the budget, doesn't it? So things can be achieved, but whether all studios of different sizes can achieve them is going to be a case in point. And it may well be that the driver of this actually is a big game and a big company that really tries to break out. We've seen companies try to do that in the past and fail, but it may be that they've got more chance of succeeding this time, right? From our perspective, and all of us in the room, we tend to look at it from our own perspective, so I apologise for that. For us, given what the market's been through, for us, I think the exciting thing is that it feels like indie's going to become indie again, and Curve lost its way, let alone anybody else. So this idea of, everything had to start at $2 million, $2 to $5 million, triple I, really, a lot of us ended up publishing bloated, average games, which were a little bit more expensive and not as good as the AAAs, which in the old days used to be called B games, which just filled up retail and nobody really bought. And I know that because I used to get them all to advertise with me. But but indie gaming, if everybody is now looking more closely at budget and smaller games and the where that game can go. So Unity were on, weren't they, earlier, saying that the WeChat games market is already worth $5 billion.
Yeah.
I think that's the really exciting thing for us. And whilst it's obviously terribly sad for the industry that there have been so many redundancies, what's also going to happen is lots of talented people are going to get together and form a different type of studio, smaller studios, different types of objectives. And companies like us, we're started signing different types of games, smaller games, more flexible games that might take a while to succeed. And also we need to be able to be in a position to survive failure. We want shots at goal. We want to try things out and survive failure. That period that we've just been through, where everything started at $2 million and went up to $10 million. The reason why it's all fallen over is because the price of failure was so high. Lots of people, the word scaling, hiring loads of people, IPOing, getting sold, making money men even more money. I think we've moved on a little bit from that. And I think there's going to be a different type of investor as well. There's going to be more tech savvy. He's going to understand a developer, understand the different nuances of a mobile company or a free-to-play company or a web browser-based company. So I think there's loads of opportunities.
But with all of that need to churn in regards to making more product to get through the systems and more platforms to do it, how are you going to balance that between Web3 and WeChat and all the new platforms? Are you going to be able to sort of like one solution will fit all those and make it sure?
No, we absolutely won't. We'll specialise. I mean, we've generally not done mobile. We've licensed out on mobile, and we just did a Crunchyroll deal last week. But that was evidence of us taking a long-term view of the development partners that we'd signed with. One of those games, 10 Second Ninja, I think we signed maybe seven years ago.
Right.
And we're still trying to find places to put that content to support that developer. But we will stick to what we know until our organisation changes and those extra skills are brought in. But to build them from the ground up is going to be driven by, managing things like overhead and skills. So I think there'll be areas where companies that we've never heard of are going to be very, very, very well known in the space of 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, and it's that innovation of new skill sets as well. Where's that skill going to come from? And that sort of fit into the current skill sets. Will they fit into the current skill sets? I don't know. I mean, that must bring an interesting challenge for Ukie in respect of going through all of the platform innovations over the last 10 years, but now all of a sudden tomorrow it's going to be WeChat and it's going to be Discord and it's going to be on and on and on. And it's completely undiscovered country for most people. And yes, a lot of people, a small amount of people are making a lot of money from that. So in regards to providing guidance and making sure that you're having what's happening in the UK and into Europe, which I know you're operating in now as well, How are Ukie going to make sure they add value to that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, it's really early doors here. So we're looking at how this is going to evolve. I think there's a utopian vision. There's the kind of greater freedom, more money comes through. There's a slightly dystopian one that Dev is looking at, instead of a duopoly, 150 different platforms, 150 different marketing strategies, 150 different payment gateways, and trying to navigate all of that. So I think as that picture evolves, there are two things I think we need to do. Socialize knowledge is kind of share, network, bring people together and say, okay, what are you doing? What are we doing? How's it working? I think then we do need guidelines and standards industry-wide, because one of the things that, that there is a risk that if you break things open, consumers are suddenly faced with a vast ocean of choice and they don't know how to navigate it. And I think what we'll see is that probably will coalesce back into some industry norms. But the critical thing is those are industry-led rather than applied to the industry from the outside. So if we can come together to raise our skills base and also look at how we coalesce long-term solutions that are going to keep, because the player is king, if we're going to keep consumers on board and not confuse them, we have to start to evolve those norms for ourselves.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think also an opportunity, I know you and I have touched on this before, the skills that I know are currently not within gaming, but the skills that I'm a WeChat platform expert, this platform expert, there's an opportunity for them to sort of morph over and add value and then really morph into this environment to be able to provide those two value points. So that'll be part of your remit as well, to make sure that new talent that is not specifically gaming talent will actually add value to the greater good.
Completely. And if I may, just on that as well, I said this morning in the keynote that the thing is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but building the new.
Yeah.
I think there is, how precious are we going to be about where we are now, and how willing are we going to be to lean into new solutions, because everybody's going on a journey of learning, and everybody's got a view on, the trust, the reliability, how these platforms are going to pan out. I think we really have to set our minds to being front foot, future facing, ready to scale these solutions and try things out, because otherwise there is a risk that lots of territories are moving super fast on this, and we need to be keeping up in that race.
No, quite right. And in Team 17's instance, Charlotte, that transition to now multiple choices coming out of what you're already doing, do better with what you've already got, but doing better with a new innovation, and also make sure the skill sets transfer from one to another, which obviously they do and don't at the same time. It's a lot. It's a lot to sort of bring, even with a publisher of your stature and size, to be able to bring all of that together and say, okay, here's our new partner developer, here's our proposition that does all of those things for you. It has to be a step process, one would have thought.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think you have to be willing to fail as well. You as much as you want it to be successful, I think you have to be willing to go into things and try things and know that it might not work, but learn from it. And as you say, then how do you apply that going forward? I think with this in particular, I think lowering the barriers to entry is good, but I think you just need to tread the path carefully, because there was a time a few years ago when everybody was trying to launch their own launchers for games. And as you were saying, Nick, like walled gardens appeared with you could only get certain types of keys with certain types of launchers. And it did become incredibly challenging. And and then people sort of very much pivoted. I was working for a distribution company at the time, and we had to look at our strategy about how did we manage that, and then it kind of went away. And if we'd have lent into that too much, we could have wasted time sort of going down a rabbit hole that actually wasn't going to be that significant to our revenue generation moving forward. So I think it's finding the right balance within your organization, having that strategic opportunity. I think as an industry we tend to wait for a big player to move first, or somebody to move first. I think in this case, Epic have obviously done that. So we kind of had best practice being shown with Fortnite across the industry. And how do you learn from what they're doing, their mistakes? And I think that's something that quite often, especially in the indie space, we have the luxury of kind of being able to have that, and looking at bigger companies and how they apply it. So that's how I would probably structure it moving forward.
A lot of challenges, right? A lot of challenges to bring all that together. So as we sort of end towards wrapping up, I'd like to reflect on the sort of actionable strategies for developers and publishers in light of the conversations we've had, and really ask, how can developers ensure their games are discoverable? Because we are now merging from the monetization into what the go-to-market is. And how can they be competitive on the alternative, whatever they might well be, app stores? is, and I know it's a question in the front of you, Stu, but towards that kind of answer, what would you be talking about?
Well, I think any developer that has a profile has an advantage. Any developer that is willing to share their road to completion of the project, to discuss that, to build a community saying we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? All of those kind of things gives you an advantage.
Yep.
We're a publisher. Our job is to build a community, but we also expect the developer to have already done something to de-risk our decision to sign it. So if a studio a developer, individual or studio can do that, then they're keeping the power when it comes to whether they choose to bring a publisher in or self-publish. The other thing I would say is don't let other people tell you, don't do this, don't do that. You decide what works for you, but make sure that it makes financial sense. Don't go off there, don't be a pioneer and get the arrows in your back. Don't do that in the current environment.
Yes.
When we were growing Curve, we did things that other publishers wouldn't do. So, for example, we signed with Charlotte's Steam key aggregation company, Gemba, when most of the big companies wouldn't do it because they thought they were protecting price and all this, that, and the other. And it was massively important to us as a small company. Similarly, we signed with Game Pass. We were one of the first 4 or 5 publishers to sign with Game Pass when it was like, $30,000 a game, and it had to be 18 months old, and it had to have over 80% Metacritic. It was completely different criteria.
Right.
But all the big companies said, oh no, that's not going to work. And then you learn your business from trying these things. But ultimately, why did we do those 2 things? We did those 2 things because it made us more commercially viable. And that's the most important thing. You're paying the rent so that you can make more mistakes. People say, oh, you've got to be ready to fail. Well, I completely disagree with that. You've got to be able to afford to fail.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a very valid point, to be honest, Stu. I think the challenges around that, in terms of the learnings particularly, we are continually learning in the marketplace, and the sort of gap between what I see in the market right now with developers in regards to how do they take those learnings. I mean, rule number 1, whether you agree or not, in terms of the community, build your community. As soon as you get wherever you start building that community, because that gives you leverage, right? That gives you a definable revenue sort of balance in regards to when to talk to publishers and what you can actually do. But those learnings that you've experienced, Charlotte, with Team 17, what would you say what would you give back to the audience today? What were the best learnings you've had across your time?
It's kind of echoing it, but community is, discoverability is the biggest challenge right now. I can't remember the final stat, but every year there's more and more games released on Steam, and the playtime of those is actually with only sort of like the top 10, and it's massively imbalanced. And you can spend a lot of money on go-to-market or marketing campaigns that potentially don't afford you anything. I think Stuart touched on it earlier as well. Like when you're signing a publishing deal, it's not a flashbang. You're signing for a term that's quite considerable, so you need to build over time. Product lifecycle management, you might not have a day 1 hit, but you can build revenue over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then it kind of becomes more profitable actually later in its life cycle than it was initially. But again, not that it helps, but every game has a different path.
Yes.
At Team 17, we've got, I think, over 1,000 digital revenue lines. We have a huge portfolio. So we have to apply different strategies to each. And I think when you have community layered on top of that, even more so, because different communities, you can't necessarily rely on applying the same strategies. But my one piece of advice, I think, would be build your community, protect your community, nurture your community, and think longer term than shorter term. Your game can be, if it's not necessarily a hit initially, you can make it very successful commercially. It doesn't have to be a day 1 success.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to you on this in a minute, Nick. But for the 2 publishers on the panel here, quick view on the value of influencers, like low to high or pain in the arse, or
really, really great when it works.
Yeah.
And they're a waste of money most of the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Definitely.
So Nick.
So I mean, obviously defer. Yeah, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I can certainly see the sense of where the guy's viewpoint on that. But this community is growing in regards to the influence they have. And I think a lot of the time it's about access management and how you manage the ability to get a return on it. One of our solutions is focusing very much in this area in terms to do that, but to do it in a clear and precise way where you can get a definable ROI. Because as the guys say, it can be kind of voodoo in terms of how do you get this balance right, and it's hit and miss and whatever else. But I think it's clear, and I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are, it is going to become very important in regards to go-to-market. And with that, how do you set parameters around that are going to be Ukie sort of competent kind of thing?
yeah, I mean, I think obviously I deferred to Stu and Charlotte on kind of the mechanics of how this works. I mean, there's some universal principles, right? Make great games that you want to play, build community off platform to drive, kind of engagement and revenue. We're really interested in some of the new parts of the emerging landscape, what's coming out of UGC, what's coming out of social gaming, looking at some of the games that have been rolled out across Discord where you've got a kind of ready access to millions of players that are already there to talk games. So, kind of building on the back of that. I think there's something about, I have no better phrase than kind of digital or monetization promiscuity here. It's just be open to the new, be open to being experimental. But I also think there's a principle here about only make new mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So kind of look at where people are going, share knowledge and learning within the community, and then build out that kind of, the right strategy for the right game. I think in terms of guardrails and legislation, it was a lot of the time when we're talking policymakers, regulators, they're still thinking boxed product or, just about streaming. And so the idea of, fundamentally getting people within Treasury to understand the economic dynamics of live service gaming is hard enough, getting them to understand a much more plural ecosystem. So I think it's really important that we have an ongoing dialogue with government about why we need a really open regulatory environment that allows us to be experimental, because otherwise it's going to shoehorn us into something when actually it's about opening up those creative opportunities.
And to be able to support that, the challenges of being experimental as well, back to Stu's point. Okay, I've got a couple of minutes left, so just before, I'd like to open it up to see if there's any questions anybody has for the guys here. But I think it's clear to see that sort of by embracing innovation, transparency today and in the future, and the adaptability in regards to how we go to market, how we monetize, developers and publishers can shape a thriving future. And mobile particularly is one of those areas that is going to thrive within those environments. So I think with all of that, we're all going to be happy with it. So has anybody got any questions for the guys here while I've got the last 90 seconds? There you go. Here we go. Surprisingly, Mr. Glendelling.
Better. Yeah, great chat. Thank you, Stuart. You're on fire, mate. I'm literally the projecting flames in front of you. Really interesting about this level playing field and marketing money aside, the idea that you can have a bit of a slow burner. How do you think the changes are going to manifest themselves, particularly in the discoverability and opportunity for that?
Stuart, why don't you take that?
That's a really difficult question to answer because I have been such a moany old git about marketing for the last 2 or 3 years because so much of it doesn't make any difference when it comes to small indie game marketing, digital. I think the power or the power of influencers, or if you like, the new sort of monetized influencer ecosystem is inefficient. So I tell you what, I would love to know the answer to that because that is probably, apart from choosing a game that will sell, it's probably the biggest challenge is marketing a digital indie title to gain more discoverability. So unfortunately, it goes back to building community. It goes back to working with Reddit and Discord. It goes back to building events on Twitch, but it's not above the line marketing. Games media has pretty much disappeared anyway, apart from Still Media, who are the best.
Nice catch.
But yeah, I think it's about getting in there and close to the player, rather than somebody else. Players don't want to be told by somebody else, some arbitrary media or third party, that they should be buying it. They want to feel like it was their own decision, or they've learned something from their peers.
Would you echo those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the best marketing tool that none of us can measure is a recommendation of game from a friend, and we can't track that. It's the most powerful piece that we can't control. So you can sort of have some influence over it with community building. I think you can have a game that on paper has all the tick boxes. You know, you've got a high wish list, you've got whatever it might be, and then it doesn't land in the way you expected. So and especially in India, I think probably more so, there doesn't seem to be a solution that, you know, you can have something that can completely surprise you that you weren't expecting. So it doesn't help, but I think you just have to be agile, and if it doesn't go the way you planned, or it goes better than you planned, so be ready to, like, okay, what's next? How do we build on this? And your community is going to be your biggest tool in that journey, because
keep learning.
You need them there and telling their friends about the game.
Smashing. Well, we're completely out of time, so please, thank you for everybody. Thank you for patience and listening. Thank you to Charlotte, Nick, Stu. Great conversation. Thank you so much.